What was the most difficult? I mean, you said you had access, and that's one thing in making films, whether you're writing a book or making a documentary. Um, Access is a huge thing, aside from telling a great story or writing a great book. What access you said you pretty much got all of them. Was there anything, any particular one which was hard to get because of schedule or that you really wanted to get or it didn't work out?
No, I'd say I was able to talk to everybody I wanted to. It took a while to schedule the Seth interview, and it might have taken a while to schedule the interview with Jeff Rowe, who was the director.
Mm.
Although I had a second interview. I had two interviews with him because the first one was really great, but it was done very early in the. He was one of the first people I spoke to, and I think it took a while to set up the second interview. But I really wanted to um, ask him some follow up questions once I had a better sense as to what the movie was, and I'd spoken to so many other people because I could ask, frankly, better questions. The Jeff Rowe interview that's presented in the book is something of a Frankenstein. That was too, and we may have alluded to that in the book. We may not. I mean, I'm not doing hard hitting journalism, so I don't feel too bad taking two interviews and smushing them together and cutting out a couple of quotes and putting them elsewhere in the book, because I feel like I'm accurately and honestly presenting his sentiment and his ideas. It's not a New York Times piece on Israel or anything,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's so that definitely happened. And I think it reads pretty through. And when I was conducting the second interview, I knew that that was my plan, and I'd already pulled out some, quite a few quotes from Jeff and used them elsewhere in the book. So I kind of knew uh, where I needed to add connective tissue and ask a question in a specific way so it would feel like a follow up to an earlier question, even if it wasn't. And
Yeah.
I told at the beginning that I was doing that, so it wasn't a surprise to him. I said, if I ask you a weird question, like that's why. And I think I had a question. I don't remember what it was, but there was a specific question that Paramount had said, please ask Jeff this. And I had to say, okay, I'm going to ask you a question, and it's one that the studio specifically requested. So I'm sorry if it breaks the flow of our conversation, but
No, no,
and
no.
it wasn't even a bad question or anything. It just, I mean, as an interviewer yourself, again, you know that there are certain conversational rhythms, and if you then interrupt with something that is obviously um, that you're verbatim reading some question that someone else had given you, it reads weird. Um, but the challenge wasn't access to people. The challenge with this one was getting access to the designs, because we were working on the book while the movie was still in production. So
Mm.
we were, and I don't mean this in any kind of a negative way. We were an afterthought, as we should have been. The priority
Yeah.
must always be to create a great movie, but I had a vision early on that we would maybe give each mutant, and there's 14 mutants in the book. There's the four turtles, and there's Splinter, and there's Superfly, and then eight more mutants. And I had thought that maybe we could give each mutant in the book their own chapter or maybe a mini chapter, and they wound up getting a page each, which is sort of the minimum that you'd want to do them justice. But I would have loved to give them like 4 pages each, but they just didn't have that level of material created like it's not even like they weren't giving it to us. I don't even know if it necessarily existed. Um, so we wound up using the material that we had to craft the book. And very late in the process, when the book was all starting to come together, it would be more apparent where the gaps were. And filling those gaps could be an issue just because everyone, on the art side of the production of the movie was so busy trying to hit the deadlines of the movie, and here I am, the fly buzzing in the ear, saying, "Well, can you give me like an early design sketch, maybe something that got rejected?" And that's not their priority. So that was where the challenge came in. But there are a lot of people who were willing to step in and fill that gap. Yashar Kasai, who was the production director, and Ken Seki, who was the head of cinematography, were both people who were obviously very interested not just in making the movie, but in the fact that an art book was getting made, and they were always good for me to send them a direct message or an email and say, hey, does this exist? And they would usually, on their lunch break, go ahead and shoot me a file that we'd have to go clear through legal and the studio to make
Yeah.
sure it was okay to use, because it didn't come from their art department. But then they mostly did clear, and then we could use them in the book. So that was more the kind of access challenges that we faced.
Sure. No, thanks for
And
sharing that. And sorry, go
well,
ahead.
a lot of times, a lot of the books I've done are very retrospective. When I'm working on a cartoon from 1984, everything was made decades ago. When you're working on something that is currently being produced, and the challenges there is just finding, because did people save it? It's a different set of challenges when you're working on something that hasn't come out yet.